Billionaire saw his maid dancing with his deaf twins. What happened next in the kitchen left him speechless. In the heart of New York, billionaire Richard Sterling lived in a mansion of glass and steel that seemed untouchable to the outside world. He had everything: money, power, and a reputation that commanded respect across industries. Yet, behind those shining walls, his life was far from perfect. His beloved wife had passed away years earlier, leaving him alone to raise their twin children, Emma and Ethan. Born deaf, the twins were bright and full of life, but Richard struggled to reach them. His busy empire consumed his time, and the distance between him and his children grew with every missed meal and every unanswered hug. One evening, Richard returned home earlier than usual, his footsteps echoing through the silent halls. As he neared the kitchen, he felt faint vibrations traveling across the marble floor. Puzzled, he followed them and stopped at the doorway. What he saw left him breathless. In the middle of the kitchen, Maria, the maid he had barely paid attention to, was dancing gracefully. Beside her, Emma and Ethan moved with wide smiles, clapping their hands and spinning in delight. There was no music playing, yet the children followed her rhythm perfectly. Maria had taught them to sense vibrations through the floor, turning silence into melody. For a moment, Richard couldn't move. His children's faces glowed with a joy he hadn't seen in years. But with that warmth came something else: guilt and confusion. Should he be angry that Maria had crossed into a role that wasn't hers? Or should he admit the painful truth that she had given his children what he could not? His heart wrestled with pride and shame as he stood silently in the doorway, unseen by the three who laughed without sound. The next morning, his pride took control. He called Maria into his office, his voice stern and sharp. "Why were you dancing with my children?" he demanded. Maria's hands trembled, but her voice was steady. "Because they were lonely, sir. They can't hear music, but they can feel it. When they dance, they come alive. Isn't that what you want for them?" Her words cut through his defenses, but still he hesitated. He had built walls of wealth and duty, and here was a maid breaking them down with nothing but kindness. As days passed, Richard began to notice more. Maria wasn't just cleaning. She was teaching the twins poems in sign language, painting with them, baking cakes through gestures and laughter. She had become the bridge between their silent world and the joy they deserved. Slowly, Richard's pride gave way to realization. One evening, he stepped into the kitchen while they were preparing a surprise cake. His twins pulled him by the hand, urging him to join their silent dance. Clumsy and uncertain, he followed Maria's lead, feeling the rhythm through the floor. Emma and Ethan laughed with pure joy, their eyes sparkling as they held him close. For the first time, Richard wasn't the billionaire commanding boardrooms. He was simply a father, rediscovering love in the quiet rhythm of a dance he never thought he'd learn. The next morning, Richard sat in his grand office, the walls lined with books he rarely read, waiting for Maria to enter. When she stepped in, nervous but composed, he wasted no time. His voice was cold, sharp, and demanding as he asked why she had been dancing with his children in the kitchen. Maria's hands trembled, but her eyes held firm. She explained softly that the twins were lonely, that they could not hear music, but could feel its rhythm through vibrations. Dancing, she said, made them come alive, gave them joy, and let them express what words and sound could not. Richard's chest tightened as her words sank in. Part of him wanted to dismiss her, to remind her she was only hired to cook and clean, not to cross boundaries. Yet another part of him knew she was right. He had seen it with his own eyes. Their smiles, their laughter, the way their faces had glowed. Still, pride was not easy to swallow, and he remained silent, watching as his twins clung to Maria's arms, unwilling to let her go. Later that evening, Richard sat in his study, staring at family portraits on the wall. In the polished frames, his late wife smiled warmly, holding the twins as babies. His throat tightened as he wondered what she would have thought. Would she have been proud of him for building an empire, or disappointed that he had let their children grow up without the warmth they deserved? The question haunted him as he thought back to Maria's trembling voice, her courage to speak truth to him, and the way his children's eyes sparkled around her in a way they never did around him. That sparkle wasn't bought with money or gifts. It was born from care, attention, and love. In the days that followed, Richard began to notice more than he ever had. He watched from a distance, unseen, as Maria worked with the twins. She was more than a maid. She was their teacher, their friend, their guiding light. He saw her kneel beside them at the kitchen table, teaching them poems through sign language. He watched as they baked cookies together, Maria letting them measure flour with clumsy little hands, laughing silently when it spilled. He even saw them painting, colors splashed across the canvas, their faces glowing with excitement as Maria encouraged every brushstroke. Each moment struck Richard like a blow, simple acts of care that he himself had never given. The more he observed, the more guilt grew inside him. He had spent years hiding behind board meetings and contracts, believing his wealth would make up for his absence. But here, in the quiet corners of his own home, he realized that money had built walls between him and his children, walls Maria was breaking down effortlessly. Her kindness, her patience, her willingness to step into their silent world, those were the things that mattered. For the first time in years, Richard questioned everything he thought he had done right. He wondered if he had been living as a father at all, or simply as a man too proud to admit he had failed at the one role that mattered most. Would you like me to continue and create part 3 in the same 500-word narrator style so the full story keeps flowing? One evening, Richard returned home later than usual, his shoulders heavy with the weight of endless meetings and contracts. The mansion was quiet, its vast halls echoing with loneliness until he noticed a soft glow spilling out from the kitchen. Curious, he walked closer, and the sight that greeted him made him pause. The kitchen table was covered in flour and sprinkles, and in the center sat a lopsided cake decorated with bright, uneven frosting that read in shaky letters, "For Daddy." Emma and Ethan, their faces glowing with excitement, stood beside Maria, who gave Richard a warm, encouraging smile. Before he could say a word, the twins rushed to his side and tugged at his hands, urging him to sit. Confused, but touched, he allowed them to lead him to a chair, where Maria gently guided the children to begin. With graceful gestures and bright faces, they performed a small dance they had been secretly practicing. Their movements were imperfect, their steps uncertain, but their joy was radiant. Richard felt a lump form in his throat as his eyes stung with unspoken tears. For years he had watched empires rise under his command, but never had he seen anything as beautiful as this, a moment where his children blossomed right before him. As the dance ended, Emma and Ethan threw their arms around him, their laughter silent but their happiness unmistakable. Richard's hands shook slightly as he hugged them back, overwhelmed with a mixture of pride and guilt. Then Maria, with gentle encouragement, nudged him toward the kitchen floor. At first, he resisted, awkward and stiff, a man far more comfortable giving orders than following steps. But Maria clapped her hands lightly and gestured for him to feel the rhythm. The children stomped softly on the tiles, sending faint vibrations through the floor, and Richard began to move clumsily in time with them. His first steps were hesitant, almost embarrassing, but when he glanced at his twins, he saw their faces lit up with joy. They laughed harder than they ever had, their eyes sparkling as they pulled him along, teaching him with their own silent rhythm. For the first time in years, Richard laughed too, a deep, genuine laugh that broke through the walls he had built around himself. That night, something inside him shifted. He realized how much time he had wasted being only a billionaire, forgetting the simplest role he had been blessed with, the role of being a father. From that evening on, the kitchen was never just a place for meals. It became their stage, their playground, and their safe space. The marble counters were sprinkled with flour more often than polished, and the polished floors echoed with the vibration of dancing feet. Every evening, Richard was no longer a distant observer, but a part of their world. He danced with his twins, baked cakes with them, painted messy canvases, and learned to communicate in ways he had never tried before. He discovered that listening wasn't about hearing words, but about feeling the heartbeat of those you loved. In their silent world, Richard learned how to listen not with his ears, but with his heart. Hadding's only narrator in English paragraph ChatGPT said, "Months later, the Sterling mansion was alive with preparations for a grand gala, an event that would bring together the most powerful executives, investors, and social elites of New York. It was Richard's company's anniversary, a celebration of his empire's success, and the night was meant to showcase the strength of his achievements. The ballroom shimmered with chandeliers. The tables were set with the finest silver, and the air was thick with the hum of ambition and wealth. Yet Richard, standing quietly at the back of the stage, found his mind far from the business deals and speeches that usually defined these gatherings. His eyes were fixed on his children, who waited nervously with Maria by their side. For weeks they had practiced a special performance, and tonight Richard had chosen to share it with the world. When the music cues faded into silence, the lights shifted, and Richard stepped forward to introduce Emma and Ethan. His voice trembled slightly, a vulnerability none of his investors had ever heard from him before. He spoke not of profits or markets, but of family, of love, and of the silent strength that had taught him more than all his years of business ever could. As he stepped aside, Maria guided the twins onto the stage. The room, filled with men and women who thrived on noise and power, fell utterly silent as the children began to move. Emma and Ethan danced gracefully, each step following vibrations that only they could feel, their faces glowing with pride and freedom. The routine was simple, yet it carried a power that words could never hold. The audience, mesmerized, leaned forward in awe, watching as two children who could not hear created beauty in silence. Richard stood at the edge of the stage, his chest tight with emotion. He had given countless presentations, sold visions of the future to boardrooms, and closed deals worth billions, but never had he felt as unprepared as he did now. Watching his children dance, he realized this moment was not about wealth, reputation, or the empire he had built. It was about love, resilience, and the courage of a maid who had dared to give his children a world beyond silence. Maria stood at the side, her eyes glistening with pride, clapping in rhythm with the children's steps, encouraging them every second. Richard felt a tear slip down his cheek, something he could not stop and did not want to. When the performance ended, the ballroom erupted into thunderous applause. Executives who had only ever cared about numbers stood, clapping with genuine admiration, some even wiping their eyes. The twins bowed shyly, holding each other's hands, their smiles radiant. Richard walked onto the stage, his heart full, and pulled his children into his arms. He held them tightly, silently promising never to let his work come before them again. Then he turned to Maria, the woman who had been the bridge between his children's silent world and his own. His voice cracked as he whispered, barely loud enough for her to hear, "Thank you for giving me back my children." That night, Richard Sterling, the billionaire who once believed money could buy everything, discovered the truth. True wealth was not measured in stock prices or luxury estates. It was measured in the laughter of his children, the warmth of their hugs, and the silent rhythm of love that filled his home. For the first time in years, Richard felt complete, not as a businessman, but as a father who had finally learned to listen with his heart